Hey, everybody, what's up, and welcome to the Arborist Blueprint podcast. If you've never been here before, today we have a cool guy on, Kevin Barkhouse. He reached out to me through Atmos Tree. Actually, I think he found the podcast first, and he was into tree planting in his backyard, which is what we're going to get into today. And so he reached out to me through, it was Atmos Tree, and we're going to be referring to Atmos Tree a bit here as we go along. So I'll give you a quick background about that. But first, in this podcast with Kevin, he plants a bunch of trees from seed in his backyard. He built his own air-pruned planters, collects seeds from around his area. He's received a little bit of training, some basic stuff. I think it's some online stuff in his area, so really accessible. Said it's really easy to do, and he just has this passion for growing a diversity of trees, things that are kind of in need, and then growing them up and giving them away to different nature conservancies or areas in his or other groups in his area. So I had a lot of ideas on how to combine Atmos Tree with some of our education points around that, and even some collaborative kind of business ideas to do with Kevin if he wanted, but I'm not sure if he's interested, but for other people or alliance members that could take advantage of, or if there's anyone that hears this that has other ideas to expand on, definitely reach out through Atmos Tree in that regard. So what Atmos Tree is, if you don't already know, it's an organization that I created, a regenerative alliance, I call it, of arborists that have come together, and we've committed to planting more trees than we're removing. So I saw a bit of an issue as being an arborist. I mean, not really an issue, but it's how we make money. We remove people's trees, we prune them. There's a whole bunch of different areas in arboriculture, but oftentimes we do remove trees and they don't get replaced. So this may not be feasible for every arborist to have a planting division in their business. Oftentimes I feel bad personally, and I know other arborists do, when we remove some trees, especially when they're healthy or they don't need to be removed. The homeowners even could feel bad. So I needed to find a bit of a solution. And I thought, why don't we charge a bit of a recycling fee for these trees when we cut them down, just like they do with tires or computers or whatever. There's always some sort of recycling fee. So people are used to paying that. And honestly, in Canada, we charge $25. We charge $20 in the US. It's really non-invasive because, as we all know, tree removals are quite expensive. And that money goes towards planting 2 trees in replacement off-site to offset the impact of our removals. And then through Atmos Tree, we provide a whole bunch of marketing and a whole branding suite, logos, decals for your trucks, all that kind of stuff, because we want you to be proud and advertise your affiliation with Atmos Tree. And we want to showcase you on how you are different as a business and how you're giving back. So Atmos Tree is not just limited to our 2-to-1 tree cycle program, as we call it, which you can, by the way, go onto our website, atmostree.org, and look under 2-to-1 members, our alliance, and you can see there's over 40 companies now that have joined across Canada and the US who are currently charging these tree cycle fees and educating their clients on how they're giving back through Atmos. We planted over 1,500 trees earlier this spring in Entwistle, Alberta, where there was a forest fire that went through and kind of wiped out a campground area. So we got this cool kind of public access area where you can go. There's going to be some signage and you can walk through and see all the trees, but there's more information about that there. A whole ton of different information, frequently asked questions, that kind of stuff on our website. So I encourage you to go check that out. And then we have a contact form there as well. So if you're an arborist or you're just interested in connecting, throw your information in there and it'll fire it off to me and I'll be in touch. And excited to say that we have our first newsletter coming out in like a couple of days. So our newsletter is going to have a bunch of educational pieces in there around regenerative arboriculture and tree planting and all these different kinds of things and stuff that Atmos is up to and whatever. So I'm trying to provide a lot of value back to arborists. That's kind of like the main goal, the foundation of Atmos Tree, is that I want to be an educational hub, a resource, a community, a tribe for us arborists that are trying to constantly improve, whether that's your mindset, your success in business, and just kind of different ways to go about things. So you can go and take a course and learn how to use a chainsaw and cut trees in a lot of different places. This is going to kind of be everything else. So I'd love to hear from you. If you have some ideas, please sign up for our newsletter. Jump on our website, atmostree.org. Check it out. Okay. Well, let's go ahead and bring Kevin on, and he can elaborate and explain to us how he has turned his backyard into a mini plant nursery, and the way he goes about it. I just thought, hey, it's a great opportunity for arborists. By the way, we're already out there. We're in the trees. We can climb them. We can access them. Why don't we start saving some of these seeds ourselves and catalog them in our trucks, whatever? Put them in some bags. Start a little mini nursery in our backyards. And if you follow the podcast all the way to the end, we're going to talk about some different co-op ideas that I have through Atmos, if you're interested. And we're going to be building some plans. So if you want to be involved and be part of like a pilot project with this, again, please reach out. And I want to employ you guys out there as arborists in your community to show off your business in your community, connect with people, build this co-op where we can share seedlings and trees, and maybe even develop a bit of a side hustle business plan selling these trees. More on that in the podcast. Okay, thanks for coming back and listening. Enjoy the podcast. Hey Kevin, it's Kurt. How you doing?
Good. How are you?
Good. I got you there. Had some technical issues like usual with this podcast stuff, but
Yeah,
I think we got her going now. So everything looks good on your end on your little dashboard there.
Yeah, all looks good. Ready to go.
Awesome. Well, before you came on, I gave a little bit of an intro as to kind of what Atmos is in general, just because we'll probably reference Atmos Tree a bit, and a really quick, brief overview about you. But honestly, I do have some organic questions around that. But I mentioned that you were into some backyard sort of tree nursery planting type stuff. But how did you find me? Like, how did you reach out to me through Atmos?
You know what? I think I found your podcast. I was looking into some stuff about arboriculture and I listen to a lot of podcasts. So
Oh, okay.
yeah, so I was kind of just doing some searching. It came up, and I saw you're in Canada. Oh my God, I'm in Canada. So found it, and I heard about Atmos Tree, and it was like kind of a cool program. So I reached out about kind of how it works for tree planting, because I usually have extra trees kicking around. So I just thought I'd reach out and see what you guys do, how it works, if I can help. And yeah, it just kind of one thing led to another, and here we are.
Nice. Yeah, that's cool. And a lot of people reach out to me actually that are just sort of interested in the idea, want to get involved somehow, but they might not be an arborist, and that's totally cool. So if anyone's listening to this and wants to kind of connect and maybe figure out some cool ideas of how to collaborate, I'm always open for that. I want Atmos Tree to be kind of steered from the people that are attracted to it, all with the outcome of planting more trees and improving our environment through more biodiversity, different types of trees and that sort of thing. So when you told me you were doing some backyard tree planting stuff, and you're not an arborist, you're in emergency services. I saw you said you're a primary care paramedic too, and so am I, or I was.
Yeah, well, I did the course, the college course, and then I got hired with the police just before just as I was finishing school. So I kind of abandoned that plan and then went into that, and I've kind of been there ever since. But I still technically, I guess, have the diploma. So
yeah, that's cool. And you did some other training. I saw you put some micro training courses around like biology or tree propagating. What's that kind of stuff that you were up to there?
Yeah, like I'm just trying to better myself, and I like learning about different topics. So I've kind of dove into a few things. So I took some micro credential courses just on like tree biology, like urban forestry type stuff. Then there's another stuff like carbon sequestration in watersheds, just some like free training that I found online with different colleges. And then maybe I think it's 2 years ago now, I did the certified seed collector course with the Forest Gene Conservation Association. So they're a nonprofit based in Ontario, are focused on conserving the genetics of Ontario forests. So they do a certification program for like best practices on collecting, seed, storing, growing. Not so much growing, but like collecting, storing, yeah, and everything to do with native tree seeds.
So how did you get interested in that? Coming from emergency services, it's a total pivot.
Yeah, it's definitely very random. There's not too many people I work with that are doing this, but No, I started gardening. Got like I still do grow vegetables and stuff, and then I got really into that. And then was listening to a podcast one day with a guy, Akiva Silver, in the States that runs a tree nursery, just talking about how he grows trees in like really tight spacing, and like how many he grows. And so I thought it was kind of cool. So I got pawpaws, like a native fruit to Ontario, a while back at the farmer's market. So I was like, I'll try growing these. I kept the seeds.
What were they?
Sort of pawpaws. I don't know if you ever heard. You probably don't have them out
No,
west.
I don't think so. I thought you said papaya, but I'm like, pawpaws.
No, they're actually, I think like papayas, people call pawpaws, so it gets a bit confusing. But no, they're like native fruit, mostly in the U.S., but kind of in like southern Ontario.
Right.
They're like, actually, they're really good, like a very tropical flavor to them. And they're like the largest native fruit to Ontario. Cool. So if you get a chance to try them ever, I would recommend it. But so I kept the seeds from those, put them in the fridge, and then planted them in the spring. And sure enough, they grew, and then I was kind of hooked. So I just kind of kept going from there, and then started going down the rabbit hole of, if I'm collecting seeds. And then I found the certified seed collection training, because I want to make sure I do it properly.
Right.
Make sure I'm not like doing more harm than good, or growing something that it's gonna become an invasive species or something. So it kind of led me down that road.
Right.
And now I grow
spreading invasives. Yeah.
I mean, it happens. So now I grow like literally hundreds of trees in my backyard every year with probably 20 different species depending on what I collect. Yeah.
You collected all of them?
Mostly. There's a few other tree nerds out there that I'll trade with. So
right.
I might have stuff they don't have. They have stuff, but I mostly collect it myself from like around the area. So
yeah, I met a guy locally here that had a landscaping company. He was really into just his hobby, growing things as well. Get dragon fruit from the grocery store just to see if you could grow all of these things. I think a lot of them obviously had to be indoors with artificial light, or like a little kind of greenhouse, maybe more humid, which is fun. Of course, it would die if it went outside, but it's really interesting that you did got into kind of like the native stuff, because it kind of has a bit of a purpose to help regenerate or increase the population of maybe certain species that are, failing or in less balance, I guess you would say, which is a whole other thing of just identifying the need for that kind of thing as well. You mentioned some certified collection training. Just before we go too far into kind of the how-to of all this, what is important about getting a certification, do you think, like at least in your experience, as far as getting training to be certified to seed collect, and where was that? Like, where can people access that information if they needed to? Yeah,
so, well, first of all, it's mostly online, the training. I think they're revamping it, but it's online, and then there's like an in the field portion, like a 1-day portion. So they run it, I think it's the field portion is just in Ontario, but they do different areas throughout the province to try it to get the most people that they can get in there. But you can do the majority of it online, even if you're not in Ontario.
What was the course called?
Pardon me?
What was the course called, or the school or whatever?
Yeah, so it's a certified seed collector training program.
That's what it's called. Okay.
Yeah. Very straightforward.
It's literally the note that I took down, certified seed collection training. Okay. So just Google that.
Just Google it, nice and easy. And it's the Forest Gene Conservation Association. So if you go on their site, there should be information about how to join. It might be waitlisted, but I would definitely recommend. They have resources too that you can buy, like a field manual. So I'd recommend that too, even if you don't take the course, just to help. It helps with tree ID. It gives you calendars for stuff like forecasting when the seeds are usually like ripe. So all that changes obviously too with climate change and year to year, but it's a good guideline and a good tool to have.
I imagine there's some groups online as well of people that are kind of into this sort of thing that probably support each other, hopefully sort of locally, because I know there can be some differences. Obviously, if there's something down in the U.S., collecting seeds is going to be different time of year, different species, so the information may not apply. And up here, I'm assuming a lot of the seeds that we're collecting need to be stratified or go through that cold period just because of our climate. That's where the seeds come from. Because you mentioned a few minutes ago about putting the seeds in the fridge before you germinated them, right? And is that what stratification is?
Yeah. So a lot of trees, they do require like a cold stratification, and it's like an evolution mechanism to keep them from dying, basically, so that they don't sprout as soon as they hit the ground and then get frozen once the cold weather comes.
Oh, okay. Makes sense. Yeah.
So
Don't die over winter.
they'll need that cold dormancy to before they'll be able to germinate properly. So every species is a little different, and they require different techniques. There's a lot of information online about depending on what species you're looking at. I try to just generally mimic what would happen in nature. So like a lot of times I've just planted stuff in the fall. Like I collect it in the fall. Let's say like acorns, plant them in the bed I'm going to grow them in, let them just be outside all winter, freeze thaw, and then by spring usually they're germinating. So you can put them in the fridge. Some are like require like a cold moist stratification, so I use like moist sand or peat moss, or even sometimes just like a damp paper towel works really well.
Right.
But yeah, like each species is going to be different, so I think that's where it's really important to know, like, if you're going to be growing something, like knowing what you're collecting, and kind of like what you're growing, and what its needs are to grow, because I think it's great to collect and propagate trees and put more out there into the world, but you don't want to be, and it happens, but you don't want to be taking a whole bunch of seed and then it dies because you didn't do your due diligence.
Go to all the work and then
then it's not really helping anybody. But
yeah, I mean, so what would you recommend for people? I mean, even arborists. I can't speak for all arborists, but I would say when you get into the industry, we're really good at learning how to fire up a chainsaw and just start cutting. It's really fun. And pruning is great. That kind of starts to lead people down the whole plant ID, there's differences between these trees, so they kind of have to be treated differently, and that would lend itself perfectly into understanding what you're collecting if you were going to start getting into propagating seeds, that sort of thing. How important do you think it is to understand some of the biology and ID off the bat? Like I feel like that would scare people away, because no one wants to just like sit down and start learning from a book, and I hate doing plant ID myself. Some people probably find it interesting, but
no, it can be a pretty heavy topic, right? I think it depends. Like it's important in the sense of, like, it depends how serious you are, right? Like if you are collecting a few seeds that you want to grow yourself, it may be not as important that you like. So forecasting is like a big part of collection, where if you get at certain times of year when the tree's flowering, or checking like how is the seed developing, that kind of thing. So during the course it was like talked about a lot, especially it's like if you have contracts with people, like let's say you're a contract collector, so I'm collecting a certain amount of seed for you, then it would be important, because you want to know, like, is the stand I'm going to be worthwhile come the fall when I get here, or is it they had really bad pollination, or they had a heavy frost and now half the seed's gone. But if you're just a collector, and I think if you know like what it is tree you're collecting from, and you're walking one day and you find a hickory tree that's dropped a bunch of nuts and you want to collect those to grow, and say go for it. If you didn't see forecast like 3 months in advance, I don't think it's the end of the world. But
right, that's cool.
Yeah.
You mentioned collecting seeds for different organizations and things, so there is opportunity for employment in this space. I know there is for a fact, because another guy that I'm friends with interviewed, Johnny Corthius, he's my mentor. He does a bunch of contracts. I forget exactly for who, but some of them are like even through forestry, where they're doing like test growing sites, different things like that. Actually, I don't know if they're collecting seed in there, if they're just thinning things out and being part of those projects, but they're kind of like additional type projects. But I know he goes through BC and Alberta in that kind of belt area where a lot of ponderosa pines grow, and they're trying to preserve ponderosa pines. So they're climbing up trees, ripping up there, collecting the cones, coming back down, and I believe it's for the national parks. And they're all paid to do that, like through contract, which is a great kind of winter project for arborists as well. So everyone just keep in mind that you can probably get into some of that kind of work outside of just your day-to-day tree work if you enjoy this sort of thing. But probably a great place to start would be doing it in your backyard like this.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you kind of like doing it kind of in your backyard. You kind of get to know the ins and outs of what you're growing, like what it likes, what it doesn't like, before you're doing it on a larger scale. Or if you collect seed and you didn't store it properly and you kill off a couple, well, it's probably better than having collected hundreds of pounds of seed and then it all dies because it's not kept properly. But I would think like arborists are probably in a really unique space to do some collection with the skill, like climbing skills, being able to access different parts of trees, being up in spots where you can check a lot better as opposed to getting a pair of binoculars out or just kind of hoping that it's ready. So I have heard of people doing contract climbing, especially like in your area and west with conifer trees.
Right.
Because those seeds really, you can dry them and save them for long periods of time. So I guess I should mention, like, there's different kinds of tree seed. There's like orthodox storage and then what's called recalcitrant. Recalcitrant means you can't let it dry out or it doesn't necessarily germinate.
Okay.
So they don't store very long.
What types of species is that?
It's mostly like deciduous trees, like a lot of like oaks, oaks, hickories, a lot of shrub species. Like mostly of the deciduous trees are kind of recalcitrant, which makes it a lot harder to bank seed for projects in future years, because you're kind of at the whim of when the trees you're collecting from are actually producing seed. You can't, like, say, like pine, collect a whole bunch in a year where you have like a bumper crop, dry it, freeze it, or put it in cold storage, and then grow them out, every year for the next 10 years until you get another big crop of seeds. So, but
and
yeah,
then the other one you said, sorry, what was the name of that style of seed again?
Recalcitrant is just a fancy word for it can't dry out. And,
can't dry out.
And then orthodox is kind of a traditional storage behavior, kind of like your vegetable seeds, right? Like you dry it down to a certain amount of moisture, or I just kind of air dry them and then keep them in storage in your fridge, or so that works pretty.
Can you just store the cones themselves and then field it later, or?
Yeah, I think you can. Like, usually what they'll do, I don't actually collect a ton of conifer species. It's not really my specialty. So, but from what I understand, like when you collect the cones, they'll put them out kind of in a single layer to dry, and then the seeds are kind of up. When you have like a pine cone and it opens up and you have the little scales or whatever, the seeds are kind of wedged up under in there, and then once they kind of dry and open, then the seeds will come out. So they have like equipment and seed processing places where they'll like dry them and then tumble them to extract all the seed and clean the wings off it that helps it fall to the ground and spread out. So
different techniques for different trees, it sounds like.
Yeah, and that's kind of, I guess, like the tricky part, right? Is that there's so many different methods for each species that it can get a little complex depending on what you're doing. So
right, but I guess not to get overwhelmed if you're going to start doing this. Maybe you're an arborist or not. You're going to be focusing on trees that are going to be in your local area, most likely, getting started maybe with some easier ones at first, and then using them from there. But one thing I wanted to ask you about was invasive versus like native and that whole thing. Was there a lot of debate around that kind of thing in those courses or in this community in general? Because obviously you don't want to invite any kind of invasive quote weeds or that sort of thing. Like I know in the West Coast there's like ivies and different things that will climb up and choke trees, and it's causing a lot of harm. And I think the term invasive is generally used for something that's, I don't know if it has a allelopathic property or something, but it's invading and deterring other natural native growth, or it's taking over. Does that resonate with you, or what would you describe invasive as?
Yeah, totally. That's it's a big topic.
Yeah.
You have a whole other podcast on this, but yeah,
I know. I'm gonna ask lots of people about that from different backgrounds as we go.
Yeah, I think it's an important topic. It was kind of brought up. There wasn't a ton of discussion, but did come up, and it has come up. I think your kind of take on it makes sense. And the way I kind of look at it is, not everything that's not native is invasive, and not everything's harmful. I think it depends on the circumstance and the context of where that plant is and what it kind of does. I think I would count invasive as something that's out competing stuff that's normally would grow there, and also hasn't really developed those relationships with other plants and animals like pollinators, or even we don't even know the fungi or bacteria in the soil, how that's working with an invasive species, right? That's from a different area, but it's tough. We have stuff in Ontario like black locust, which is technically classified as invasive, and it does spread quickly, and you cut it and it'll shoot up from the roots, but it needs full sun. So I've never seen it in a forest, in a forest with a canopy cover on the edges or in ditches. I see it a lot, but so it's kind of vilified. But it's a tree that it grows really fast. It's really dense hardwood. It's rot resistant, better than pressure treated. It has a lot of insects that it feeds. The flowers are edible. It probably was, I think, in this area, maybe pre-Ice Age. I don't know, but I feel or if not, it's not too far south of here that it's native in say New York State. So it all depends, right? I think that's one where you could just, if you say a blanket, this is bad, this is good. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's
difficult.
If you have bare ground and you're putting in, I don't know, pick a plant that's not taking over, hydrangeas or something, it's not spreading and taking over the forest. Is it really that big a deal? No. So I think it really depends.
Yeah, I think it does depend, and I think it goes beyond some of our understanding, or not that we maybe couldn't figure it out with the technology and science we have now, but I don't think there's a lot of funding towards a lot of projects into soil science as much as there is with other things. Of course, the cash crops for the timber industry and that sort of thing, there's probably lots of investigation around that, but it's interesting, the biodiversity in the soil, when you can zoom down or zoom in, really, really far, these interactions, I love to talk about them and spread information about how important it is in the soil, but there's a balance going on down there, and doing things above ground can have unintended consequences down there, and I think we need to rely and trust in nature to create that balance and keep trees healthy and that sort of thing. So it's something to consider for sure, in my opinion, but I don't think we can fully understand at this point what is going on and how important these relationships are, with the soil food web, or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, totally. I think too, there are a lot of really bad invasives around here, I'm sure in your area, so it all depends, right? I wouldn't say just plant whatever you want to plant, or collect and grow whatever you want to grow, because obviously there can be unintended consequences. There's stuff we know is bad, and I think there's some plants that maybe haven't got a foothold yet but are going to be bad in the future. So I think it's tough. It's just trying to be a good steward and not,
Right. And it's difficult too with some species, out here, for example, thistle is so aggressive and, grows such a big plant and puts off a ton of seeds that grow really well. A dandelion, a bunch of other, quote, weeds. But there's a lot of benefits to those plants depending on what you're using them for. And I think, like you mentioned before, mimic nature, that's kind of one of our slogans with Atmos Tree, is that we can trust and rely in nature to kind of just support it, and it will figure things out, and you just have to trust in it. But one example of that with say dandelions or thistle, like some of these weeds, is that they're trying to stop bare soil from existing. Like having bare soil or tilled land where the fungal balance has been disrupted is just awful, and that is a breeding ground for these weeds. And what they're trying to do is, they often have broad leaves, but they grow fast. They're very hardy. Their seeds can last a long time. They're trying to correct the soil and start the succession scale. So I often tell people through a lot of tree health consultations, because they're asking about weeds and mulching and putting landscape fabric down, all these kinds of things. So I try and translate it this way. But so like bare soil is bad. Rain can compact it, a whole bunch of other things. But the weeds grow and the broad leaves shade the soil and they create like a living mulch layer and stop erosion, all that kind of stuff. But they often have like big tap roots, and those tap roots are like vertical tilling, I guess you would say, or like vertical aeration, big long spots. And they're annuals, so they die off, then their organic matter contributes to further decomposition, leaving behind that nice hole to allow oxygen to get down to roots. And then if you fast forward hundreds of years, oftentimes those weeds then die off and other annual species grow, then perennials, then woody shrubs. Then before you know it, you have deciduous forest and coniferous forest coming in as like a climax type environment, I guess you would say, which is more acidic and fungal in the soil versus freshly tilled ground or bare soil or dirt where it's kind of inert and lifeless, is usually bacterial and alkaline, is how it's been explained to me and how I try and help people understand it. But weeds aren't bad. I think we just call them pioneer species. But
yeah, I mean, yeah, totally. They're really just kind of doing what they're meant to do, right? Which is everything you just talked about. They're kind of starting the succession, and then we come in and we spray them and we cut them and we pull them out, and then they, there's 1 million plus seeds in the seed bank in your lawn, and then next year they all pop up again, and we keep doing the same thing, right? We just keep kind of halting the succession, because I mean,
I know it's hard, sick cycle, right? Because everyone sprays, or I shouldn't say everyone, but like a lot of places, even municipalities are out there spraying thistle and things like that to try and knock them down and knock them back. And I get it, we have to kind of take some of them out of there. Maybe there's other ways. I know that in town here they pull them out too and put them in garbage bags before they go to seed, hopefully. The last time I saw them, they did it after they went to seed, but but anyway, I think they're trying to slow it down. But when you spray and things, you're killing all that sensitive microbiology in the soil, resetting it back to square one, to that lifeless dirt again, and then you're going to have weeds growing even more again. It's like a vicious cycle that just sits at square one before things are allowed to finally succeed. So just knowing that little bit of background now of us talking about that, how do you use that in consideration when you're trying to grow seeds or grow your seedlings, your trees in your backyard or whatever you're doing as far as soil choices? Like, you probably don't go and grab the most lifeless dirt off the ditch that's been nuked with Roundup to put it in there, but
it's a good question. I probably don't pay enough attention as I should to the soil like I'm using. I try to use
but
a
it's
lot
working.
of yeah, it works. I guess the good thing about trees, especially like the ones suited to here, they don't always need super nutrient rich soil to grow. They'll kind of, people will grow trees in gravel and they grow pretty well. So, eventually they will. But, so I tend to use some soil I purchase. I try to save money, though. I kind of make my own compost. So it's just, food scraps, leaf waste, that kind of stuff. I use a lot of that. Maybe mixed with a little bit of bought soil to kind of get a bit better aeration. And then I just try to, the good thing is like growing them in specific beds, keeping them kind of moist and mulch. The soil kind of does all right for the season. And I think, I grow like a lot of trees in a small space. So, and I've reused soil with different trees over the years, and they still grow pretty well. So I think, it's definitely a consideration. But I think the trees can do pretty well. I wouldn't like not knowing a lot about soil or everything about soil health. I wouldn't let that deter you from starting. I'd say just start and then kind of take it from there.
Yeah, definitely. I kind of use that as an example too for people in their yards when I'm explaining why to use, say, wood chip mulch and not grass. You're not trying to grow your tomatoes under your spruce tree. Like, you kind of want to match the species succession when you're growing. Like maybe junipers can grow in around some spruce trees and some other pine trees or woody shrubs. And then over in a different garden, you might have like your brassicas, which just so happen not to be mycorrhizal associated. So you can grow all of those plants together. You're like your veggie garden and whatever. And maybe you mulch it with straw, something earlier on the succession scale. And a lot of this kind of stuff is permaculture-y type things, which I'm going to have future podcasts on, kind of explaining what permaculture is and how people use it. And it's basically just mimicking nature and using your yields around you. But I know from personal experience, trying to grow seeds in too nutrient-rich of soil is not good. That will definitely wreck them. So I went to like a potting soil, kind of as you mentioned, from our local greenhouse area, and use that to start them. And it was like a biostimulant. I think they might have a little bit of mycorrhizal kind of stuff and everything, but generally that's not a lot of stuff going on in there. And there's a lot of pore space, like the vermiculite, perlite, and these different things that they put into potting soils. I know is different from regular soil because there's not the same interactions in soil like there is out in nature to create all of that pore space out there. So you need other things to create the proper structure and pore space in potted, isolated plant areas. So that might be something to consider, which we can talk about in a few minutes, about how you incorporate that into like your pseudo outdoor pots that you're growing in. But that's what I use, and I seem to have a lot more success. Like I don't think seeds need a lot of nutrient and everything right away. They have a lot of energy and everything kind of contained within them to get going and adapt through a variety of environments. Like nature would do that, of course, to try and get it established.
Totally. And with trees and stuff too, you want to be careful because too much kind of nutrition, especially near the end of a growing season, they need to kind of harden off, stop growing, and kind of turn that green growth into wood so that it doesn't die over the winter and the cold. So sometimes too much like nitrogen or too much fertility, they can get really big really quickly in the year, but then they're dying back in the winter because that growth is too tender, and unless they're really protected, you're kind of causing more issues than you're helping, right?
That's a good point.
And like to your point, I think like especially having a lot of drainage and good pore space is probably pretty important especially for root growth. You get into like clays and soil and stuff like that, it can really compact and limit the growth of your trees. So that is, I think, an important consideration.
Right. Yeah. If I can share a quick story. I went to someone for a health consultation because I'm really into tree health and soil, all that kind of stuff. So I actually like charge locally for these consultations. We go and hang out for half an hour to an hour and look at their tree and try and diagnose some insects and diseases and give them recommendations on how to kind of fix their soil or a variety of different things that sort of align with what we're talking about. Which, by the way, everybody, I plan to release a whole bunch of information around in future newsletters and develop courses and that sort of thing around how to do that. So arborists out there can actually go out there and get paid for their time to do this, because a lot of people call us and they're like, hey, my tree, I think I need it pruned and blah, blah, blah. And you get there and not that you're wasting time, but you're spending a lot of time there sometimes with people that just want sort of free information. And I think once you have that skill and knowledge base to offer these recommendations, it's worth something. So anyway, I digress. I went to this one guy's house and it was like late fall. Leaves didn't fall off the tree. Big. And the leaves that were normally on this tree when I would see it around town were way smaller. These were huge, broad, like deep, rich green leaves. And I'm like, what the heck? That's kind of weird. Like, what's going on here? And he's like, yeah, my tree's dying back. I think it was like an Evans cherry or something, kind of like an ornamental fruit type tree we have here. And it was like pretty thick trunk. Like it's a pretty big tree for like a front yard too. And things were just kind of adding up to what I like normally see. And I'm like, wow, like why is it still growing? He's like, yeah, it grows really well every year. The leaves stay on like really long and late in the year. And I'm looking at his lawn, and his lawn is just like so dense, thick, rich green. And I'm like, I wonder if he's like over fertilizing it. And all of a sudden it just kind of clicked. And then I'm like, do you use like synthetic fertilizer? He's like, oh yeah, like right deep into the fall, just high nitrogen every year. So the tree's been like rapidly growing from all of this synthetic fertilizer he's been putting on for years and years and years. And if people don't know, like a synthetic fertilizer is like water soluble and it's plant available immediately. So microbes and things like that don't have to convert it into a plant available form, like with compost or any kind of organic fertilizer, which is why I recommend organic. I think it's natural and it mimics nature, of course. So anyways, you got this synthetic stuff on there, and so it just takes the plant out of whatever its normal phenology cycle is, like where you said it would like start to harden off and some of the herbaceous growth would turn woody, and it was like still just growing like late and late into the year, and then it would like die back and cause all this stress, and it stresses them out because it forces them into like rapid growth and rich color, which looks great, but it may not be the right time. It's not the vegetative growth phase for these trees. So just be, in my opinion, just be really careful with synthetic fertilizers unless you know you're deficient and you know kind of how they work. I would just avoid them altogether myself and use composts and mulch and let sort of nature and the biology sort of take its course. Have you had any experience with synthetics versus organics, or what's your thoughts there?
No, I don't really use, especially any synthetic fertilizer. I don't. Sometimes I'll do like a fish emulsion, like foliar spray, or like once or twice in the year, just to give it a bit of extra, more to feed the soil than anything. But that helps a little bit, just to get a bit of extra nutrients and some nitrogen in there. But I don't think they really need it. And I kind of, the longer I've been doing this, I kind of think that almost, not neglect, but the less
Stress, maybe?
kind of
Natural
intervention
stress?
is better. Yeah, a bit of stress is probably good, right? Because especially depending where you're going to be planting these trees, it's not always the best site.
Yeah.
So it kind of lets the trees, it forces the trees to just take off, right, and kind of fend for themselves. So they're not on life support with like a bunch of fertilizer and then they're stuck out in a field somewhere and like, what the heck's going on here, right?
That's a really good point. And like when I tell people they want to get a new tree, I'm like, the best thing you can do is like, I mean, have it grow from seed right in your yard if it just naturally fell there. And if you could go out to your local area and transplant something that's grown from seed, like think of how hardy that is. Like that, it had to just fall randomly, land there, find the perfect spot, and start to grow in its environment. It's already hardy. It's gone through all the weather conditions. No one's been watering it. There hasn't been worm castings, delicately placed around it, all that kind of stuff. So the tree is like strong and tough. And you think about our conventional nurseries and our systems of how we get trees now, from their perspective and their point of view, coming from these people that grow trees, is that they want to grow high volume and they want to grow the popular varieties that people want. So we have a limited diversity, and they need to get them to a state that they can sell them. And the bigger they are, the more money they get. So of course, this is going to encourage you to use synthetic fertilizers, put them in like a greenhouse or a protected environment to protect your investments, and then consolidate them into a massive area where you can do this to save money again, and then ship them out to other places, other smaller nurseries where they can sell them. So I hope people already have light bulbs going off now, thinking how many problems along that whole process can cause the trees to be weak and not be able to establish. And this is why we have so many problems, like as arborists or anyone, when you go buy a tree and you stick it in your yard, and it's like half the time they grow. Like even me in my backyard here, we planted like, I don't know, 8 or 9 trees, way too many for our yard, by the way. But I think we've replaced half of them. And with my knowledge and preparation and trying to source them properly, they just don't grow.
Yeah.
Like if you get them from a nursery like that.
There's so many things, and I get like they're running a business and they have a job that they're trying to do. There are a lot of issues with everything you were just talking about. I mean, even I think first of all is like your seed source, right? I don't think a lot of people are thinking about where's your seed coming from. Is it like from southern United States, and then we're planting it in Canada where the seasons are at different lengths and it's used to flowering out at this time,
right?
The genetic code's used to being in a different area, and then they're grown in containers pumped full of fertilizer, and this is not every nursery but just generally speaking, and then sent off and probably sold and planted, who knows, like the hottest time of year in the summer when people are thinking about planting a tree. And it's maybe not then the tree's stressed, and then you start having issues, right? I think containers are a really big thing to consider. I grow all my trees what's called bare root,
Yeah, can you explain that? That's a great point.
Yeah, so they're grown in a container, like a special kind of like nursery bed with a whole bunch of other trees, and essentially bare root just means there's no pot. So at the end of the growing season, kind of once the tree's gone dormant, leaves start falling off, I dig them out, and then you can plant them straight away. You can store them for the winter. You can ship them if you want. Like if you wrap the roots with, I'll use like a moist sawdust or a bit of like light peat or something like that. And you can send bundles of trees out while they're dormant before they wake up, and then plant them in the spring, or you can plant them right away in the fall. But there's a lot of benefits, I think. I feel like you can grow a stronger tree. With containers, there's a lot of problems with circling roots. In the typical containers, a root will go down and will hit the bottom of the pot, and it'll just start circling around. So when you pull it out, you just see roots kind of balled everywhere, and that sets that tree up for a lot of problems in the future.
Right, because those roots aren't always herbaceous still. Like they're kind of like the canopy above, like they go woody and that sort of thing. So they can form and hold that shape and encourage that twisting nature when they go into the ground.
Totally. So unless you're like pruning those out and kind of really correcting the form when you plant the tree, you can have a lot of issues. And you'll see a lot of street trees where the kind of buttress of the tree is like just above ground, and you can see kind of some of those roots coming out, and you can see them curling around the tree, right? Because they're just thrown in the ground. I think they're thrown in the ground, and then 10, 15 years later there's an issue when that root's kind of suffocating the tree, and then probably calling you to come fix it. Right? So,
this is a huge problem in arboriculture, huge problem that I'm sure everyone sees, and you can't diagnose sometimes what's going on, and you're like, well, sure enough, you end up cutting the tree down or something, and then kind of dig it out, and you're like, oh, look at the huge girdling root system here or something, when you start to grind it out, and you're like, yeah, it's too bad. At least you can give them a bit of a reason why, the homeowners and things, but a lot of times we just don't know what's going on, and I think it can come down to girdling roots and all of the stuff that happens before they even get planted. So
yeah, totally.
I know you can get bare root though from certain nurseries. If you have a good nursery, you can ask and look around to try and find bare root trees.
It's definitely becoming, I think, more popular. I mean, it's probably how trees were grown in the nursery industry like 100 years ago or whenever, before plastic kind of took off. But there are a lot of benefits. The root structure is so much better. You're not getting like as big a tree, and it's with all the foliage off. You're getting a little tree with no. It looks like you're buying a stick, but planting that stick and giving it a bit of protection to let it take off, it's going to catch up to a bigger potted tree in a short order, and be a healthier tree, I think. So.
I 100% agree with that. And I don't know if anyone has experience out there where you're starting your seedlings for your tomatoes and whatever. It's the same sort of thing. You put all this work in for like 4 weeks or whatever it is before you plant them outside, and then you plant some other stuff. You plant a few more with seed just directly in the ground, and they can establish naturally out there and go through some of those environmental conditions. And they surpass the stuff that you had to grow indoors in a different environment where the roots have girdled up and they've had a certain humidity and warmth, and then you take them outside and then they're shocked and it stunts them and they barely grow. It's like the same thing with trees. Like if you can save money and buy smaller trees and plant them, and they'll establish way better and be healthier. And I try and encourage a lot of people to do this, like as arborists, because we go to people's trees all the time and they're like, they're on their last legs because they don't notice a lot of these things that we notice in trees in time. Or you buy a new house, they come in and they're like, my tree looks like garbage, like prune it up. And you're like, I don't know if it's going to make it. But you're like, hey, here's an idea. Let's plant a small tree now. It's going to cost you $50, or maybe even less. And we'll plant it under the canopy of that tree. It doesn't take anything to put it in the ground. You can find a way to get even between the roots of the other tree, have that one slowly starting to grow. Well, it probably wouldn't even be that slow. And then when it comes time to potentially remove the bigger one, then you have a tree already established and growing, and now you have a couple $100 tree, for how big it is. That's already in the ground. It's great.
Yeah. I think that's
go
a
ahead.
Really good idea. No, I was gonna say I think that's a really good idea, and I think it's just shifting the mindset and for people to know, like, you're putting in a little stick right now, but with a bit of protection so it doesn't get eaten by rabbits. And
Yeah.
within another year
Wildlife.
or two, if you can wait, not going to be. It's going to be similar size to that tree you just took out, right? Or that you wanted to buy for 10 times the price. And it's probably going to grow better throughout its life, have stronger roots, and put on better growth.
Yep. 100%. Okay, well, people, if they're wondering, why don't we go into talking about kind of how you do this, like what it looks like, what have you been doing, so people can kind of visualize. They want to start this little nursery in their backyard for fun or whatever, or start selling their trees, and so give us your experience on kind of how you do it, what you'd recommend for someone to do if they just got like an urban, municipal backyard kind of little plot.
Yeah. So, well, first I'll just say I have not created any of these ideas. I've just seen them and stolen them, and they work. So, by all means, take this and run with it. Or if you have better ideas, go for it. But
what do they say? We stand on the shoulders of giants. Meaning we all just learn something from someone else. It's just a big long telephone game. So
yeah, exactly. So if it works, why reinvent the wheel, right? So I did a bit of quick math, and I think I grow in about just trees, about 75 square feet, I'd say, of growing space in my backyard, which isn't like that much. And I'll grow maybe 1,000 to 1,500 trees a year doing that.
Wow.
And you could probably even push it a bit more if you really wanted to. So I grow everything in these what are called air pruning beds. If you look online, there's a lot of information about them. So essentially, all it is I'll take some wood, preferably like cedar or something that's not going to rot. I do about 8 inches deep, but you can adjust it as much as you want. You build a box to whatever kind of specification you want. Let's say I think like 1 feet by 2 feet is kind of a good size. It gives you, it's portable, it's not too heavy. It just kind of works overall pretty well.
So it's just sitting on the ground then, because you said it's portable. So you're basically just making a frame and then leaving the bottom open?
So what you do is you take hardware cloth. This is what I do. It's just like a wire mesh, like a 1/4 inch or kind of 1/2 inch wire mesh. It's pretty. You can buy like a heavier gauge. It doesn't have to be super heavy. You can just buy it at any hardware store. I'll put that on the bottom and like nail it in or find a way to fasten that in. Get some more wood underneath just to kind of hold on the hardware cloth on the bottom, and then you elevate that off the ground a few inches. Or you can, as much as you want, but essentially you cover the bottom of that hardware cloth. Like in the bottom of the bed, I'd put like, say, burlap or a bunch of leaves or something, and then your soil. Okay. And then you plant your seeds in the bed. And then what that does, especially for tap-rooted trees, it's really good for that. It probably works best.
Oh, so they're air pruning out the bottom? Like there's a gap between the bottom of the bed and the actual ground you're on.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, I got you. Okay, I was thinking you were air pruning just out the side even, but you're actually air pruning out the bottom too.
Yeah, no. Yeah, I guess you could do the sides depending on what you built it with. But yeah, so the root will go down, and when it hits the bottom, it'll hit the air, and that naturally just tells the root to stop growing downwards, and then it'll put all its effort into growing lateral roots. So yeah, it works really well for taproot species. At the end of the year, then you have what would normally look like a carrot coming out of the ground with like a couple of root hairs on it. Usually big bushy roots on this tree. So it's set up, I think, to grow even better once you then transplant that out. And I find for some species, especially taprooted ones that are kind of finicky to grow, stuff like hickories will grow really long taproot. That's, if you like break it at all, really affects the growth of the tree. Like it takes a long time to recover. But in these beds, once I dig them out and I've planted them, they actually seem to kind of take off. Like they're still slow growing, but they seem to do a lot better than if you planted it in the ground, because then you might grow a 4-foot long taproot that you're having to then try to dig out or cut, and then really stressing the tree. This just like naturally cuts it off at a certain length, and then you're good to plant it.
Where are you finding information? Like, do you look online as far as each species just to kind of know whether it's like a big taproot species or it's like the orthodox type seed or that kind of thing? Like just to kind of get an individual requirement specification. Is there anywhere you reference quickly for that?
Yeah, like I think online, like if you Google it, you can usually find that information out.
Just
There is a
propagate an
good,
oak tree and give you.
yeah,
Okay.
it'll tell you. But there's a good resource. This website RNGR, which I think is like the U.S. Forest Service. It has like a woody plant seed manual with like probably a couple hundred different species, and it'll give you kind of the best practices for growing each of those trees. So
Oh, cool.
I can give you the information on that if you want for the
Sure.
notes
Yeah. If you send it
afterwards.
over after, I'll put it in the show notes here, the captions or whatever.
But honestly, I'd say just try. Like, just if you're interested in doing it, collect some seeds and just throw them in a bed if you have a growing space, even in a pot. Like, just try it. Like, see what comes up, see how it grows, and get an idea that way. And then you can kind of learn the ins and outs as you go. But
Yeah.
I don't think people need to be bogged down by its being so technical. Like, plants want to grow, so just give them the space to do it, and they will.
Okay.
But yeah, so the air pruning bed, that's kind of how I do the air pruning beds. It's very simple. There's a lot of resources online. A good YouTube channel, Edible Acres. I don't know if you've ever heard of that.
Edible
one.
acres. No, I didn't know about that one. That's kind
Yeah, there's a bunch of resources on like how to build them, what they look like,
Okay.
how they work. So, and I've also just lately been experimenting with plastic. Those plastic vegetable crates. They're
Yeah.
kind of like
Oh, like
put 'em on
milk
the
crates?
bottom. Yeah, they're just like a bit bigger. They're maybe like 1.5 feet by 2 feet, and they're kind of just meshed on the bottom. So I'll just put hardware cloth or like landscape fabric or something in that to kind of hold the soil in place, and then fill it with soil, and then grow the trees in that. And it's
Yeah,
just,
we could even use our mulch. I bet like some wood chips and stuff on the bottom would probably
yeah,
an inch
that
or
actually
two
would be
might
great. Yeah,
with some
totally.
wire mesh would kind of and then it decomposes. It's all organic, and unless you have
Yeah, like-
fabric and it's sitting in your garage and you're like, I got to get rid of this stuff because it's and then you
Yeah,
can use
yeah,
it.
whatever. Honestly, whatever works, right? I've done bundles of leaves. Like it'll break down, but the good thing is the roots will eventually start holding everything in place once the trees germinate. So, and then like in a 1 foot by, depending on the species, but like in a 1 foot by 2 foot bed, you could easily do 75, 100 trees, depending on the species.
Are you spacing it out like in an organized fashion, or are we kind of like just sprinkling like a little spray and pray action?
Whatever you want. It depends. Sometimes I'll do like with bigger seeds, like say like a hickory nut or something. I'll do like just enough space so they're not quite touching, and then maybe an inch between each one, just to kind of to see. But I mean, honestly, you can fill the whole thing with trees, and they'll grow. Sometimes you'll have stuff where one seed, one might not grow quite as fast, and it gets a bit shaded by the other trees, so you end up with a little,
Right.
1 inch tall tree. It's still a good tree. Maybe
So are you
just plant
growing
it somewhere else?
a big mix then, like a diversity in each container? Would you recommend that, or do you try and isolate each one just being seedlings at first?
You can. I mean, I've done both ways. I did a little experiment actually this past year where I just took I think I had like 20 different species of like forest species, kind of like a mini forest type blend, I called it, and threw them all in the bed in the fall when I collected them, put them all in there, and then just left it, and then it worked really well. Everything grew really well. There were some little hiccups. Some things got a bit shaded out just because they germinated at different times. But
Right.
I think overall everything is probably better actually, because then you're having more diversity of species. It's probably feeding the soil better, but it's a lot harder to then dig them all out and try to organize them after that.
Yeah.
So I'd say it just depends on what you're doing. If you're planting a bunch of trees that you're going to just go plant in your yard randomly or somewhere, go for it.
For sure.
If you want to be a bit more organized, so you're not sorting trees in the fall, then I would recommend doing it in their own bed, which is probably mostly what I do.
Yeah. Yeah, I could see just from a specific health benefit standpoint, I love the idea of planting them all different together. I know there's been some studies in the past, like through permaculture and mostly with cover crops and like agriculture, but when you hit more than, I think it was 12, once you hit a greater than 12 variety of plants in the soil, the biodiversity in the soil and everything, and like some other benefits they measured, I can't remember now, but it just exponentially went up. And then I think again when it hit like 36 different species, it like shot up again. So So people were like aiming to try and put these cover crop seed mixes on their fields in agriculture with a blend that was at least 12 different species, and then they would get this crazy like feeding into their soil, because you mentioned they feed the soil, and if people don't know, trees photosynthesize, right? Take the sun's energy and water and the carbon dioxide out of the air, but when they take the carbon dioxide, they don't use it all to put on vegetative growth. I've heard that many species, up to about 40% of the photosynthate, which is like the simple sugars or the carbon they've taken and converted out of the atmosphere, is excreted through the roots into the soil, specifically to feed fungi and other biology in the soil. So like all of the bacterias and different things like that. The smallest, most sensitive species come in there and feed off that. And then they create waste and they grow, and then other species in the soil eat them, and that's where a lot of the nutrients come from in the soil. So when you have a diversity of species in one planter, you're getting like a diversity of photosynthate and microbiology in there too, creating a broader spectrum food essentially. Instead of eating like protein shakes as a human, maybe it's like eating a well-rounded whole foods diet for a tree. So
yeah, totally.
You can think of it that way, but
yeah, like I've heard it said, like, you know, people say healthy soil feeds healthy plants, but I think sometimes it's the other way around, right? Healthy plants are going to feed the soil up if they're photosynthesizing well.
Yeah.
And especially a diverse mix, like you said, it's going to make sense that they're going to attract different organisms. You might have some nitrogen fixers in there. That are
do you put any in? Like, do you put in clovers or anything like that to kind of cover in between and as a nitrogen fixer?
No, just because in the beds I grow them so dense that
right
by the time they kind of come up and leaf out, they've almost totally closed canopy. Like there's not really any room for it. It's basically just trees. So, and
of course, you're not leaving this here forever to be its own little forest. It's with purpose that you're growing them and germinating them, and then they're going to be moved later on. So those considerations may or may not matter in that stance.
Yeah.
So
exactly.
where would you recommend people put these boxes? Like, do they do better in kind of like, say I have a south facing backyard, right? So if I go closer to the house, it's like a nuclear microclimate. But if I go where my trees are on the opposite side of the yard, there's a fence there, so I have like a 5-foot area where the ground is always shaded, which I take advantage of for my trees to keep the soil moist there. Would you say germinating's better? Like, have you tried both of them? I would think in the shade more, because there's not so much demand on them to grow with lots of light. But
yeah, I'd say definitely at least part shade is good, probably better, because most of them are, depending on what you're growing, especially like if you're growing trees that are native and probably growing in a forest, that's probably how they're starting out anyways,
right.
Is mostly in a shaded environment. I kind of have like limited sunlight in my yard where I'm kind of having to figure out the best place to put them, so they don't get a ton of sun and they still do pretty well. You have to consider, depending too, like if it's only getting the sun from one angle for a while, maybe, which is where the smaller beds are nice, you can kind of turn them and, you know, help kind of spread it out so it's not just one area. But I think definitely more shaded is probably better. But if you have a really sunny area, maybe covering it with a bit of shade cloth, if you can get some, works too, right? You kind of work with what you have and what you have access to. But the good thing with like these beds is like you can kind of make them any size you want. Like if you're even in an apartment on a balcony, you could put a couple small boxes and grow 100, 200 trees, probably no problem.
Wow, that's cool. So what's timing look like then for pre-planning this? I'm assuming you're thinking about this during the season, collecting later in the season when seeds have been obviously developed and grown. Like, let's take a pine cone, for example. It has to grow that year through the vegetative phase, and then in the fall, it's up there hanging on top of the tree. I'm assuming they fall off naturally throughout the winter. At that point, you'd think I would know.
Sorry. Yeah, it
but
depends on...
yeah.
Every species is different, right? Mostly it's in the fall. You'll get some like poplars and like silver maple and some of those kind of ones that are in the spring. Mm-hmm. And some take 2 years before they'll produce the seed. Like red oaks take 2 years to produce seed. Sometimes it depends, like if there's been a pest that's attacked it, or if you have a drought, like it might not produce seed that year, right? Even if you think it's kind of due. So that's where the forecasting kind of
interesting
helps.
Yeah,
But it all just depends on what your context is, right? If you're running a nursery, it's going to be very different than someone who's just doing it as a hobby. And if there's no seed this year, then it's not that big a deal, probably. I tend to have a couple areas where I have permission to collect from that are forested. So a lot of the time I just kind of see what's growing and what's producing seed, and then I'll just kind of collect stuff I want to grow, which is kind of the nice thing. There's no pressure, right, to have a certain amount of seed that I'm getting. So
okay. But in general, conifers produce cones throughout the growing season, and they're ripe, ready by kind of fall. Would you say late fall? And then would that be the same with trees and shrubs that produce berries? They usually come up, and then by fall you can take them as well. But
yeah,
deciduous trees like poplar, of course, the fluff that comes out everywhere in the springtime, has those tiny little seeds in them.
Yeah.
So they're more of like a springtime type thing.
Yeah, that's pretty good rule of thumb. Like some stuff will be, some fruits are maybe ready like late July, August, sometimes September. Some other things are later into October. Some will hold on all winter that you can collect them. So it's really, I think, just the most important thing is knowing what you're collecting. That you're collecting the right species, so that you're not collecting. So like here we have a lot of sugar maple, but we also have the Norway maple, which is somewhat invasive and kind of everywhere. So knowing that you're collecting the right species is important. I mean, if you just want to grow something as an experiment to see how it grows, it's probably not the end of the world.
Right.
If you're then giving it to somebody or selling it or for whatever purpose, you want to make sure that you're not giving somebody something that's misidentified, right?
I guess you can just, it depends on what your objective is. You can go out for a forest walk and see trees that you like and just for fun grab seeds as you come across them over time, build up a bit of a catalog, grow them, whatever, replant them somewhere. Or maybe you go to the nurseries, you find out what native plants you have. Like, for example, here, I've seen some different native lists of trees from this area, but the list of what's actually grown in the nurseries or sold in the nurseries, is very small compared to that. So if you're trying to have a bit of a purpose around this and maybe grow more seedlings to get more biodiversity back out there for things that are kind of lacking in our nurseries, or maybe they're expensive. Like I think I have some white or limber pine seedlings that were, I was told they were like $40-50 each because they're basically endangered, or they are endangered now, and there's not a lot around to get them. So that could be kind of lucrative too, as like a little side hobby if you are growing some of the more endangered species like that, and can continue on and produce and then maybe sell them. I don't know if you sell them to nurseries or sell them privately, that sort of thing.
Yeah,
it depends on your objective.
I think nurseries probably have objective, and it probably depends on how easy is it to get the seed. Is it selling? Is it something they can sell?
Right.
I would just be careful. There's certain rules around endangered species or that are listed as threatened. I don't know them super well, but stuff like here, the American chestnut, like you're not likely to find it too much in the wild, but it's something that I think there's certain rules around collecting and propagating. I mean, again, it would all depend. If you found it and there's a whole pile of chestnuts there that are just going to get eaten by squirrels as opposed to propagated, maybe you can collect them and then figure out what to do with them after that. But just I would know kind of some of that before some of those species that are a bit more endangered. There might be groups that are specifically working on that are kind of counting on those seeds. But overall, if you're out and something you're looking for is like, even if you're into growing fruit trees or nut trees or just for your own berry bushes, and you want to grow your own to save a bit of money, it's a good option. Yeah,
or grow off the stuff you already have in your yard too. You can try that, or friends' places and that sort of thing too.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, you can probably look online, different Facebook groups, things like that. There might be people already doing this kind of thing in your area, so they might be able to kind of mentor you and offer you some advice on, or maybe they'll go out with you too, and you can. We have a horticultural society here too, and I'm sure they do this kind of stuff. And they do seed sharing, so some people go out and get a whole bunch of seeds off one thing, and they have a little meeting, and then they share all their seeds and talk about all this kind of stuff. So definitely look into your local environmental committees or horticultural societies or whatever it is on Google, Facebook. I'm sure you can find a lot of info that way. But okay, so you have your bed, you made your air-pruned bed. You've kind of chosen a spot. Soil we sort of talked about. I'd probably recommend starting out, if it's brand new, maybe like a bit of a potting type mix, just to have a little bit of that pore space and vermiculite, things like that. Yep. But maybe mix that with some compost, or I had an idea, which I try and recommend to people, is like, say you're collecting a bunch of seeds out in a little forest nearby your place. Maybe you can use a little bit of that duff layer of organic matter and soil. Take a little bit of that and kind of mix that into your soil mix as well, so you have some native microbiology and organic matter in there, which might help kind of kickstart it a little bit and build some of those populations. But I mean, again, you don't need nothing too complex, because it's going to be only there for a year, right? Like, and then okay, so you got your soil, and then you got your seed. How are you broadcasting that seed? What's that look like?
It's different. Like, it's just, again, different for every species. I think, like, I think that, first of all, that idea of collecting a bit of soil or that duff layer from the forest is a really good idea. I've done that a tiny bit just to try to inoculate an area in my yard, but I think it's, just get those beneficial fungi and stuff kind of that the trees are used to in there, especially if you're collecting seed from that area. I think it makes sense. And then it just depends on the species. Bigger seeds are pretty easy. I just line them up like you would, like you're planting a vegetable. Smaller seeds can be a bit trickier. I'm sure there's like different seed planters for different vegetables that you can apply to this. A lot of times smaller seeds, I'll just sprinkle them over, or mix them with a bit of sand, sprinkle that on top of the bed, cover it with like a really light amount of soil, and then mulch, and then that's pretty much it.
What kind of mulch and how thick you going with that?
It depends. Like, I'll use leaf. Sometimes I'll just use leaves if I have access. I use sawdust. I had a bunch of sawdust from a guy like a woodworker had a bunch of sawdust he was getting rid of, so I use that.
Right.
It works really well. I'd say put it on as thick as you can over the winter, and then come spring you're going to need to pull a lot of it back, just because it might inhibit the germination of some of the seeds if it's too thick.
Okay.
But as like an insulation over the winter, it's definitely just layer it on there.
All right.
And then come spring, pull it back, and you should be good to go. And then you can add more as the trees, once they get growing, you can add more to
then
the bed.
Kind of underneath, yeah.
Yeah.
One thing I'd like to note there too, you mentioned sawdust, because obviously we get a lot of sawdust, and we could hold a bag and catch a lot of sawdust off of some cutting that we're doing out in the field. But just for arborists, keep in mind we're using a lot of inorganic, like nasty oil to lubricate the saws. I know there are organic options out there, so maybe if you don't use it consistently, maybe consider getting a bottle of something a little more natural if you're going to use your own sawdust, and then throw that in for when you're making cuts on a log to build up your sawdust, or collect leaves like you said from the forest, that sort of thing. And you're using that sort of to insulate the seeds there over the winter. And I'm assuming you're broadcasting like conifers or other seeds that need to stratify in the winter, mulching it, and then you're kind of covering your beds too, aren't you, so that nothing blows out?
Yep. Yeah, and I would cover it. Yeah,
like tar pit or something.
You use wood chips too.
Okay.
If you mulch it, you're probably pretty good. Like, they're not going to blow out at that point. One thing I think that I'd mention that's really important is you're going to want protection from predators like chipmunks, mice, rats, and
birds picking out seeds. They like seeds.
Squirrels, yeah, they will destroy your stuff. Even into the growing season, like, at least I find around here, everything has to be grown under like a wire mesh cage that's a couple feet tall. Otherwise, chipmunks and squirrels will just wipe it out. Doesn't matter if the trees are already grown, if the trees are a foot tall, they'll come in and just chew them in half, I think, just for the fun of it. So that's, cover them over the winter so that you're not, in the spring coming out to an empty bed.
Yeah, sure.
And then in the growing season, you definitely need protection from squirrels.
Right, and you build some kind of a structure like this wire mesh or whatever it is, you can double up with that and use it for your kind of shade cloth, or I mean, frost protection in the fall if you ever got that far, or I mean, a whole bunch of different things. If it's going to hail, you could throw something over it if you have a bit of a frame kind of set out. So there's probably a lot
Yeah,
of
totally.
great ideas to use a bit of a frame structure in there. Are you then generally having a separate planting bed that's ready in the spring for like your deciduous kind of stuff, like your spring seed harvesting and growing in that?
It just depends on the species. Like I kind of sometimes I'll plant them in everything in the fall and just leave it and then see what comes up.
Oh, okay.
Sometimes depending how the weather goes, if it's frozen before I can get everything done, I'll stratify my seeds either in the fridge or I have another method which I'll tell you about. But then I'll plant in the spring, kind of as soon as the ground starts to thaw. I'll get the seeds in there, and then leave them to start growing as soon as it warms up. But if you don't have like a lot of room in your fridge, especially when you're collecting bigger seeds, one good method I found is if you have a space, you can dig a hole, and I'll use a 5-gallon bucket with a bunch of holes drilled in it.
Yep.
You'll take your seeds, you put sand, like just regular play sand in it, and then you take your seeds. I'll put them in those reusable mesh grocery bags for like vegetables. I don't know if you see this at the grocery store.
Mm-hmm.
Put them in there, or in a plastic bag or whatever you're going to store them in. Put them in the sand, bury that in the ground with the lid on and something on top of it so stuff can't get at it, and then just cover that up for the winter. And then that kind of keeps them insulated from getting too frozen or too hot throughout the year. And then as soon as the ground is thawed enough to dig that out, then I'll pull out my seeds, and a lot of times they've already started germinating in there.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, but that's a good way to store like a lot of seeds in a small space for pretty low cost. I think that's the good thing about this is you can do it fairly low cost and kind of DIY, which is nice.
Yeah. Are you thinning then a lot of them partway through the year, like where they're growing just too close and too densely together, or do you just leave them and just pull them apart, like roots apart, when you're ready to basically harvest them and sell them or give them away?
Yeah, that's a good question. I just leave them, and then at the end of the year, whatever happens. I take them out. You'll end up with some that are like tiny and not that you'd want to like give away. But if you had space and you wanted to put that in a bed in the ground for another year or two, you'd have a good sized tree. It's still got lots of them. The roots look exactly the same. They still have really good root structure. They're just didn't get a chance to put on a lot of top growth.
Okay.
So yeah, if you were doing this to sell them, you're not going to want to sell somebody like a 2-inch tall tree, or maybe they'd want to buy it for a cheaper price. But
do you ever transplant them and then let them go for another year?
Yeah, I've done that, and you can do that. You just put them in a bed in the ground, or you
just leave them in there, I guess.
Air pruning bed. Yeah, you're going to want to dig them out in the fall after the first year because the roots will freeze too hard above ground.
Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah, they're air-pruned off, so they need to go into something more permanent into the ground.
Yeah, like unless you really mulched everything really well all around the bed, but it's probably easier. What I do is I'll just dig them all up. I'll kind of shake the soil off the roots, bundle them together, and then just dig a hole and bury them kind of all bundled together in the ground, mulch that, and then they'll be good for the winter.
Nice.
Yeah, but you could take those little guys and just plant them out somewhere in like a bed that's kind of protected or has half decent soil. Let it grow for another year, and you'll probably have a decent sized tree.
Okay, so and then I mean, watering is pretty self-explanatory. I know, depending on your soil, and you could overdo it, underdo it. But are you doing anything special with water? Like, are you avoiding tap water for any reason, or harvesting rainwater or anything?
I do have a rain barrel I use. I'll still use the tap, like if you need to get it done quickly. One thing I find that's good is in a bit of shade with a lot of trees growing in the bed, once they get a certain size, they kind of cover the soil themselves and kind of creates that microclimate, so it doesn't dry. It'll dry out eventually. Definitely they need watering, but it's not as bad as like say pots that are above ground.
Right.
So they do need watering, but it's not crazy.
Fancy that. Hey, it's like it's mimicking nature, and it's self-mulch and self-shading and decreasing the wind. And if we just did this more everywhere, then we wouldn't have to be watering and having so much die-off from all these plants. And
Yeah.
It just makes me think of urban planting, like how we just monoculture boulevards with trees and then put them with grass, and it's like it just goes against everything nature like wants. Then we have to have all of these human costly interventions, and just like if you just planted trees together in a group and let them have little mini forest stands everywhere, it would do so much better.
I totally agree. I know
But
it's
that's another podcast I can't wait to do.
Right? Yeah.
Okay, so any other considerations that you would say before we discuss kind of where to get rid of these trees?
I think that's the main thing. I just say to people, like, if you're interested in doing it, just start doing it. Don't be held up. It's easy. You're gonna kill trees. Stuff's gonna die. It's gonna happen. You just learn for the next time, right?
Yeah.
I think we've kind of discussed all the main considerations. I think building the beds is pretty straightforward. If you don't know how to, if you can find somebody that can give you a hand, or you can buy those plastic crates, anything that's got opening at the bottom or some opening at the bottom so that the roots will prune.
Mm-hmm.
You're in good shape.
Nice. Recycling. You probably even get old pallets and just take them apart and build some stuff too out of that.
Yeah,
for free.
Totally. Yep.
Okay, so then what are we doing then with these trees once we got them after a year? I mean, like you said, if you're going to keep them, they're too small. You might bundle them all together so all the roots are together into little really tiny mini forests, and then you stick those in the ground to save them. But the stuff that you have now, like, what have you done, or what opportunities are there out there for people that are doing this?
Well, I think the opportunities are endless. There's like a major shortage, my understanding, of native trees and especially native seed, especially like with known ecotype, like where that seed was from. So there's lots of people looking to plant trees. I found a kind of good group of areas that I've donated them. I've tried selling a few here and there, which you could totally do if you're interested in doing this, starting your own little nursery and selling trees on the side. Like, you can totally do it. There is some demand there. I think you're gonna want to, you're gonna be doing all the stuff with getting a website and everything that comes with that. I find it can be kind of time consuming, and then the fact of dealing with people, if something didn't work out with the tree, I'd feel really bad taking somebody's money, and then a tree dies, and then that's where there's a lot of need with planting projects. So I've had a few, I've donated to like the Nature Conservancy, a few native plant groups in the area. Really cool. A friend of mine works for the Ontario Woodlot Association, and there's a really cool project in Kitchener called Wijindaban, which is like a indigenous-led planting project near the Grand River. So I've donated a bunch of trees to them, where they're putting in like food forests and native tree plantings and stuff like that. And that's going to be
awesome.
Tended, basically forever is the plan. So it's kind of cool that way. So I think if you hook up, there's lots of tree planting groups in everybody's area. There's options, I think, potentially even with other nurseries, selling them 1-year plants that you've kind of starter plants you've grown. There's options there.
Yep.
A lot of people need trees, and a lot of people like trees, so
I think so too. And that's kind of how we sort of connected, because you're like, Atmos Tree, we're trying to plant more trees, and you're growing a bunch of trees, and we sort of both have some ideas around like a cooperative type thing. And it's a perfect sort of segue from what you mentioned there, people growing them in their backyard, and maybe you don't want to charge for them because you don't know if they're going to grow or something like that, but there's a lot of demand for these trees and local native trees. And one idea that I already had told you in the past a little bit, maybe we can expand on some of these ideas for a brainstorm, but Caitlin, my team lead at Atmos Tree, says I'm not supposed to talk too much about all these like ideas I have for Atmos Tree because they haven't come to fruition yet and whatever. But anyways, this is one of my bigger ideas for the future that's going to be free, I believe, and bring people together in the communities. But I had this idea for a nursery co-op, and then you've kind of helped me expand on this with what you're doing. But like, we have alliance members, so arborists that are part of Atmos Tree that charge a recycling fee when they cut someone's tree down. It's called the 2-to-1 tree cycle program. And then we plant 2 trees off-site in different plantations, like to offset their removals, essentially. So some people want trees, or they have interest in doing and getting a little bit more involved, and they want trees kind of in their backyard, like in their community. And with Atmos Tree, we also want to promote all of the companies that are part of Atmos Tree, because if they're successful, then they're going to be planting more trees, right? And they're more eco-conscious. We want them to be successful. So we want to offer all these kind of business tools and different ideas and ways they can get involved. So one of the ideas I had was that, like, say if you had a tree company and you were removing some trees on the side as well as doing this, initially I was like, hey, we could just fund trees and I could send you seedlings of whatever variety for your area where we want to source them from. And then you could go to like your local farmers market or some sort of community event where you can promote your business and then give away seedlings to people in your community. But instead of just giving away like one seedling, you know, you'd have someone come up that has a bit of a backyard, like me, like we did this in our yard this year, or you, where you have a variety of different shrubs and trees, and maybe you're into gardening, maybe it's with your local horticulture society, whatever. But you say, hey, can you take like 10 or 20 of these little 1-year-old seedlings and foster them? So that these people could take them and foster them, and then Atmos Tree can be like the hub, like the website that you were talking about that you would need to kind of log this information. So we have the homeowners now that have the seeds, we got their name, and say they're fostering, like, for example, in our backyard here in Cochrane, I took home like 14 larch seedlings, and I have them all growing back there. So they're going to grow, and they're going to be 2-year-old seedlings next year, and they're in our environment, they're outside, they're kind of hardening off and doing all those processes. They're growing in a great environment with a ton of mulch and other different things, so they're mycorrhizal associated, whatever. All these benefits, you know, that we were talking about with growing things mimicking nature versus the conventional. And then, say you're in your community and you're like, oh, I want to go and get a tree, and we're already encouraging buying, you know, trees when they're younger because of all those problems we talked about earlier. So get people out of the habit of buying large caliper trees that come with those problems. I mean, of course they still can if they want, but if they're interested and open to getting a small one, why not get it for free from someone in your community that's been fostering these trees, right? And then it was funded by Atmos Tree and promoted by the local arborist in that area, so then they can get involved in their community. And the arborist doesn't have to do anything else other than give them away initially, and then all the information is tracked on Atmos Tree and the website, and then it's just homeowner to homeowner trading trees and meeting up. And then if one dies, it's like whatever, it was free anyways, and there's no further responsibility on that arborist. So I thought, in addition to like this program, we could just expand on this and do seed collections as well. And maybe in certain ways, Atmos Tree, as we connect the dots, can fund people to get their own little mini nurseries now, like, and collect their own seeds in their native area, just like you're doing. And we already kind of had some ideas around that. Like, do you have any ideas in that space as far as how we could work together, or you could see this working together with Atmos and other arborists? Or
Yeah, I could see how that could work. If I think a group of people, kind of decentralized network of people that are interested in this, that are growing trees, that could come and say, go to Atmos Tree and say, hey, yeah, I'll have 50 whatever sugar maples from this area in September, and then this person, I have like this many larch, right, whatever, and then you keep a repository with Atmos Tree about how many trees you have, where they're from, and then, you know, you can have large numbers of trees and you're not relying on one single source. So if I have a year where we have a horrible year for trees, like for seeds, someone else might have a good year, right? And have
diversity.
Yeah, it's the diversity, and it kind of is more resilient than, because like right now, I don't know a lot about the nursery industry, but there are a lot of big nurseries that, like a few really big ones, right? So they have an issue or something happens, that's a whole problem.
That could be a problem.
Supply chain, right? And I think like small farms and small growers in general are kind of the future of where things need to go for.
I think so too.
And tree planting and stuff. So people that can want to learn how to do this, to like learn how to grow them, it's not super complicated. You can do it if something you're interested in.
And we want to provide more formal education around that too as time progresses, because we're releasing lots of information and articles, again, like I said, to support arborists. So I could use you as an example, like where you could have, you sent me some pictures already, so we can have some pictures and some sort of how-to guide to get people going and interested. So when they're searching on the internet, they can find a little bit of a hub of a resource of how to do this and kind of what to do with it, and maybe some sort of business ideas of how you could have a little side hustle selling these trees and getting them back into the environment. And Atmos could support it.
Like, I mean, anybody can do that. There's nothing special about me other than I just kind of did a bit of research and kind of started doing it, right? So I don't have a horticultural background. I don't have a background in any of that stuff. So if anybody is interested in doing it, just start. And I think, it'd be good to get some resources out there for people and start kind of a little nursery network co-op. And then I think it gives a good outlet for, we know the trees are going to a good place, that they're where they're needed. It gives Atmos Tree like a good network of people to rely on to buy trees from, or to get source trees from. And ultimately gets more trees planted and good healthy quality trees. Yeah,
man. And last time we talked, I was like trying to convince Kevin to start like a little business. So maybe, and like no pressure, but like someone out there is going to want to do this, and I hope we can kind of develop a bit of a model and then replicate it across different cities and things. But you had mentioned going to like different businesses in your municipality, for example, that have little plots of land, like unused area where it's just left to grow weeds, and they just mow it every so often. It's more of like a pain in the ass than anything. But these businesses might even want to go green or have a bit of a solution. If they were approached with like a simple kind of solution, that would actually be less maintenance than trying to mow lawns and do all this kind of stuff. So for example, I could see this happening where like you grow your seedlings and you have 1,000 to get rid of. Maybe you give some to here, some to there. And then of course there's no actual cost directly for Atmos Tree to purchase those seedlings from you. But I mean, that could be your business, and we could purchase them from you instead of from a different seedling provider. Or if, because you said you didn't really want money for them, not very much, whatever, but in kind, you could produce them. And then maybe you have a local charity group, maybe your daughter's in like, mine's in dance, and they go and they do some community events, that kind of thing. I could be like, hey, you guys want to come out and plant some trees, whatever, or a local community group. And then we could offer like a donation to purchase those seedlings to that charity, for example. This is just one idea. I have so many ideas. I'm an ideas guy. And and then we go to this business, and they got their little patch in their little backyard and whatever, and we're like, hey, let's plant the heck out of this place. We got tons of native trees. We include them in all of the collaborative marketing on how they're trying to improve things in their community, and they're setting a good example. And then the local charity group's getting out there, and you're growing them, and you're sourcing them from the local area. And then now they have a patch of land that's growing like this crazy diverse little ecosystem that's basically doesn't need to be maintained. It doesn't need to be watered. It doesn't need to be mowed. Nothing. And it's all giving back to the environment. And then, maybe that arborist even goes and looks after it every once in a while and just trims up the outside edges if there's some deadwood building up, and chucks it back into the little forest or whatever. But then they're attached to this positive project and can advertise it on their website, or in collaboration with Atmos. Like, I see so many different angles here of how tons of people can benefit, and for almost no cost.
Yeah, I think I do think it's a good option for someone looking to doing tree planting. I don't know if I'm in a position to do that or not, but I do think like that's a good market to go after, right?
And you would charge the business, of course.
Yeah, but when you consider like what they're probably paying in landscaping fees to get some trees in the ground and kind of maintained for the first couple of years till they get big enough, like then they're saving money, right? In the long run.
It's like there might be an installation fee, like they got to purchase a certain amount of seedlings or other seeds to go in and grow some grasses, whatever it might look like, and that removing maybe some of the old material, however that looks, an installation cost, and then maybe like a subscription based maintenance thing where like once a year that you go back as an arborist, and it's like a lower cost just to go and check on things and update everyone of how it's going. But yeah, that would be a cool little business, I think.
Yeah, it's definitely an option if people are interested. It could be pretty cool to see happen.
Reach out. Anyone has ideas around that kind of thing, or wants to get involved, or wants to start working on something like that with me and Atmos Tree, we have some resources and people here that could help, and we would love to get something like going, like a little pilot project like that. That'd be great.
Yeah, that'd be very cool.
Sweet, dude.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that you'd like to mention that we didn't touch on? I think I kind of got the gist of it. Of course, the big thing was going out and looking for, identifying what species you're doing and the unique different things about it, but you said just go for it. Sometimes you can just kind of get started.
Yeah, like I think you could just like I start with one species and get learn about it. Whether you do what I did and buy some fruit at the farmers market and keep the seeds, I mean that's an easy way to start. And then if you're like me, you'll quickly go crazy and collect more than you have room to grow, and then you're trying to figure out what do I do with all these trees at the end of the year, but it always seems to work out. So just go for it.
That's great, man.
Yeah.
And I know you're not on social media or anything yet. You don't have a physical presence there, so we won't send people your way or anything. But if you ever do start something up and you start a page, because you might want to do this more publicly or turn it into like a little mini business, definitely let me know. We'd love to be a part of it.
Well, I'll give you my email, and then if people want to reach out, they can email if they're
Sounds good. Yeah, send me your email after in email so I can. Actually, I already have your email. Is that the same one you want to use?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Okay. All right. I can attach it in show notes.
More than
and
happy
whatever.
to talk about any of this stuff if anybody's interested or if I can help at all.
Answer some questions. Cool.
Yeah, happy to help.
That'd be great. Thanks, Kevin. I appreciate it.
This has been great.
Okay. I'm excited. I'm going to start looking around for some seeds. I think while I'm out there pruning trees, and it's just like, oh, there's some, and just keep a little bag in my truck and start kind of cataloging them and keeping them in there, and then plant them.
100%. Let me know. Keep me posted.
Yeah, we'll see.
Excited.
I don't know what my success rate's going to be, but
you'll do well.
Okay. Okay, thanks, man. Don't hang up here. I'm going to hit stop, and then we just got to let it upload.
Right on. Sounds good.
Okay, bye, everybody.
Cheers.